Every once in a while, archaeologists, and sometimes amateur archaeologists, make remarkable and bizarre discoveries. Sometimes the finding is so surprising that they're unable to explain what it is they found, how it came into existence, or ascertain its value. An out-of-place artifact is an artifact of historical, archaeological, or paleontological interest found in an unusual context, which challenges conventional historical chronology by its presence in that context. Such artifacts may appear too advanced for the technology known to have existed at that time, or may suggest human presence at a time before humans are known to have existed. Other examples may suggest contact between different cultures that is hard to account for with conventional historical understanding. We will explore these artifacts and allow you to determine what you think they are, their purpose, and who made them. Giant walls are built to keep people out, or keep people in. They are barriers, usually built for political reasons to hold off an invading army or group of unwanted people. In some cases, they may be used to house people or protect animals. In any case, a wall is something of a huge discovery in archaeology. If you ever find yourself driving through Rockwall, Texas, you may ask yourself why this suburb of Dallas is called Rockwall. Well, there is an ancient wall there. You can't see it because it's buried, but it's there. For over 160 years, scientists have claimed the wall is nothing more than a natural formation. Most people living in Rockwall, Texas, do not even know that their city is named after an ancient rock wall city, complete with a skull of a giant that was found while some people were digging a well looking for water a long time ago. The wall is an almost perfect rectangle, 4 miles wide and 7 miles, encompassing more than 20 square miles long, with most of the wall being buried. The top of the wall, at all outcroppings found to date, have a uniform elevation of 550 feet above mean sea level. Mary Patty Wade Gibson is the granddaughter of T.U. Wade, founder of the wall at the Rockwall County Historical Foundation. She described the additional digging her grandfather and other men did at the home site. In her description were cubicles or rooms constructed of stone which you could walk through and would reach a corridor which seemed to run in a direction into the hill that the town square sits upon. She told of an incident in 1906 of 2 unidentified men digging out the corridor which had apparently been filled with erosion. Their intent was to reach a room or cavity under the town which might be full of gold, apparently derived from a story from Indian legend. The ceiling of the corridor had steep slopes, describing a Gothic-type arched ceiling, much like the Mayans built, and the further into the corridor the 2 men excavated, the steeper the slope of the ceiling became. Consequently, the men, fearful of a structural failure, abandoned their search for gold. Mary Patty Gibson also says that during her grandfather's exploration of the wall, he discovered on the outside the wall went straight down. On the inside, she described the wall going down to about 40 feet, curves inward, and becomes much thicker. Additional information provided by the daughter of the late Mr. Deweese, an early settler of Rockwall, who described a doorway with a diagonal-shaped stone in the wall at the Wade residence on Highway 66. This portion of the wall was open to visitors from 1936 until the late 1940s, and was consequently backfilled because of dangerous structural conditions. In 1949, a Mr. Sanders of Fort Worth, Texas, did an excavation of the wall. From this excavation, 4 large stones were brought up, with the largest weighing approximately 2 tons. On these stones were found inscriptions with what appear to be pictographs. The Dallas Morning News on the 5th of November 1967 reported that back in the 1920s, T.H. Meredith said a well was dug on his farm just east of the town of Rockwall, and Mr. Meredith declared that though digging went alongside a masonry wall which seemed to have an arch over a doorway or window. Metal rings were found at the site, which was composed of tin, titanium, and iron, embedded in the rock. You can see it in this photo just above the pickaxe. Of course, all this material and the skull have been lost, and much of the wall today cannot be seen. It's also unlikely any modern excavations will happen because the town has grown and is now an urban section next to Dallas. But if you drive through Rockwall, Texas, you can think about what mysteries may lie just a few feet below your car. Women today carry a purse. It's part of our modern culture. Men wear backpacks and carry a wallet. We have bags for pretty much everything today. One of the more mysterious symbols that has been found in ancient carvings is an image that looks uncannily like a handbag. The shape appears in depictions made by the Sumerians in Iraq, in the ruins of ancient Turkish temples, in decorations of the Moai of New Zealand, and in crafts made by the Olmecs of Central America. Handbags can be seen in the art of various cultures from around the world and throughout time, with the first known instance of a handbag appearing at the end of the Ice Age. What is this mysterious symbol that can be found throughout the ancient world? The handbag image is so called because it looks very similar to the modern-day purse. The objects typically feature a rounded, handle-like top and a rectangular bottom, and may include varying degrees of additional details of texture or pattern. The images sometimes appear as standalone objects. Sometimes they are depicted in the hand of a person, a god, or mythical being, in a manner similar to how one would hold a basket. One of the earliest instances of the handbag motif can be seen in the ruins of Göbekli Tepe, located at the top of a mountain range in southeast Turkey. Dating back to approximately 11,000 BC, Göbekli Tepe is one of the oldest temple complexes ever discovered. The exact purpose of the mountain sanctuary is unknown. However, it appears that the temple may have served as a site for religious sacrifices. The walls and pillars of the temple were decorated with finely carved animal gods and mythical creatures, perhaps in an effort to portray the many different creations of the cosmos. Amidst these other carvings are 3 handbags. Experts believe that early religions worshipped the fundamental elements of life on Earth. Therefore, the 3 Göbekli Tepe handbags, taken as an early form of those icons, could be said to symbolically define the site as a temple. Elsewhere, the handbag image shows up with striking similarities in 2 stone reliefs, one made by the Assyrians of ancient Iraq, sometime between 880 to 859 BC, and the other made by the Olmecs of ancient Mesoamerica, sometime between 1200 and 400 BC. In both of these images, a man-like figure carries the handbag in his hand, as if it were a basket or purse. When used in Assyrian art, it is said the purse holds magic dust. When depicted in Olmec art, they postulate that it contains herbs for getting high. This suggests that the handbag may have been a standard of measurement uniquely discovered by both cultures. In any case, these handbags appear on statues and reliefs all around the world and are very similar. What were they? What did they contain? And why was it important to depict this symbol in statues and art thousands of years ago? A less ancient discovery, but very important to modern culture, is the famous Shroud of Turin. The shroud is said to be an ancient cloth that covered the body of Jesus Christ when he ascended from his tomb. The power of his ascension caused an image of his body on the cloth. Determining if the shroud is authentic means following its timeline from the tomb to Italy, where it is now. The history of the shroud from the 15th century is well recorded. It's the time backward from then to the death of Jesus that is in question. It is said the shroud was taken to Turkey to heal a king, then made its way to Italy. Connecting these dots of where it was is part of history. The other part is how an image came to be on the shroud. Tests have shown it is not a painting or contains pigments of an impression. Pollens from the cloth seem to tell its origin is indeed from the correct area Jesus was buried. There are several reddish stains on the shroud suggesting blood, but it is uncertain whether these stains were produced at the same time as the image or afterwards. The image on the shroud appears like the negative of a photograph, though photography did not exist in the time of Jesus. The image clearly and accurately depicts the wounds on Christ and blood that flowed from them. Some believe the shroud is a simple forgery, while others point to the blood and other accurate points within the image and the cloth itself dating to the proper age. In 1976, Pete Schumacher, John Jackson, and Eric Jumpner analyzed a photograph of the shroud image using a VP8 image analyzer, which was developed for NASA to create brightness maps of the moon. A brightness map interprets differences of brightness within an image as differences of elevation. They found that, unlike any photograph they had analyzed, the shroud image has the property of decoding into a three-dimensional image, when the darker parts of the image are interpreted to be those features of the man that they were closest to on the shroud, and the lighter areas of the image of those features that were farthest. The researchers could not replicate the effect when they attempted to transfer similar images using techniques of block print, engravings, a hot statue, and bas relief. The Shroud of Turin is either an accurate image of Christ on cloth, or it is the cleverest forgery ever constructed by an early man. In May of 2018, Turin's International Center of Sidenology held its annual meeting in Chambéry, France. The primary topic of discussion was a new reevaluation of its carbon dating. Earth is probably the last place you'd look for extraterrestrials, especially with all the new exoplanet discoveries and the endless quest to prove there was life on Mars at least once in the past, something billion years ago. But are we looking too far? Some scientists are less out there and more down to earth, literally, when it comes to finding traces of alien life forms. Not that these hypothetical aliens are actually crawling around our planet. What these scientists argue is that they may have dropped by before humans even existed and left behind technosignatures, such as radios, rockets, or other tech that might have been lying deep underground or floating around in space for eons. Astrophysicist John Wright has elicited more than a few eye rolls with a controversial argument that was recently published in the International Journal of Astrobiology. He believes that technosignatures from an alien species that landed not just on Earth or the Moon, but even Mars before its atmosphere was obliterated, or Venus before it became a swirl of toxic clouds, could have possibly survived somewhere. While Venusian clouds and volcanoes would have long since eroded and liquefied any shred of evidence, he still believes it is possible something could be buried on Earth, Mars, or the Moon if it hadn't long ago become space junk. If a prior technological, perhaps spacefaring species ever arose in the solar system, it might have produced artifacts or other technosignatures that have survived to present day. Meaning solar system artifacts provides a potential path to resolving an astrobiology question. Wright doesn't believe aliens actually lived on Earth, and even if they had, erosion and ever-shifting land masses would have turned any trace of them to dust. Hypothetical alien trash would have had a much better chance of surviving in the subsurface of Mars, away from the solar winds and radiation it constantly gets blasted with, and too deep to be smashed by meteorite impacts. The red planet also has no plate tectonics to crush any ancient computers or whatever they might have scattered around. Other scientists are more skeptical, possibly because we haven't yet found any prehistoric ray guns or radio transmitters next to a T-Rex skeleton. Astronomy professor Evi Leob believes that there could have been a visit from other civilizations on Earth. The search for extraterrestrial artifacts is more likely to find technosignatures in space, though, however unlikely that still is. The most effective way to zoom in on something unusual would be a sky survey. Whether we'd actually recognize something as alien, even if we saw it, is an entirely different thought to keep both scientists up at night. Supporters of the drive to find extraterrestrial artifacts are already peering deep into space in a bid to discover cities, satellite networks, or gigantic megastructures. Some even think our own solar system could contain probes sent by an advanced civilization, wreckage from old spaceships, or even evidence of ancient settlements on planets like Mars or Venus. Yet other experts slam this headline, grabbing easily sensationalized discipline as entertainment science, and question whether there's any point looking for such tiny needles in the mega haystack of our breathtakingly gigantic universe. Avi Loeb, chair of the Harvard University Astronomy Department, is among the world's most respected astrophysicists. He stunned the scientific community by refusing to rule out the possibility that a strange cigar-shaped object which sped through our solar system may have been alien in origin. Astronomers named the space rock Oumuamua, Hawaiian for scout, and said it was an interstellar visitor which formed in another star system before traveling here through the void of deep space. He did not simply dismiss the idea that it was built by an extraterrestrial civilization and suggested it could have been a light cell craft, calling on his fellow scientists to keep an open mind about its origins. What sort of alien technology are astronomers searching for right now? Well, examples include artificial light, industrial pollution, or reflection of starlight from solar cells on the surface of planets around other stars, megastructures, or fleets of satellites. Space archaeology with our best telescopes might reveal technological equipment floating in space, similar to the 2 Voyager probes that we launched and are now leaving the solar system. But we should keep in mind that the travel time is very long between stars. It would take the Voyagers about 100,000 years to reach the nearest stars to our Sun. The equipment could therefore be defunct if it belongs to a civilization that died by now. The artifacts we're most likely to find include the defunct debris of highly sophisticated technologies, which could be the wreckage of alien spaceships. Perhaps our best way to put our hands on them is to find objects that collide with Earth and survive as meteorites. It can be hard to resist the allure of a mysterious object found in a context that doesn't seem to make rational sense, suggesting that it's proof of time travelers, lost civilizations, or alien visitors. You don't have to be a conspiracy theorist or a cryptozoologist to marvel at a bizarre computer-like device that dates back to ancient Greece, or a 2,000-year-old battery found outside of Baghdad in the 1930s. So-called out-of-place artifacts are often said to baffle scientists and conspiracy theorists. They suggest that scientific efforts to identify their origin and purpose willfully ignore potentially controversial explanations outside the mainstream. After all, it's true enough that science is constantly evolving, and we still don't have the answers to many of life's mysteries. But imagine how everyday objects from our own time might be interpreted thousands of years from now if information about how they're used doesn't survive. A lot of artifacts become out of place because their original context might have provided important clues, but the object was moved and that context is lost. When we're so far removed from the original circumstances in which a historical object was created, it's easy to let all sorts of things cloud our conclusions about what those objects represent. How do you explain a sarcophagus lid that appears to show a spaceship, primitive sculptures that look like airplanes, or cave drawings resembling astronauts in spacesuits? Some proponents of the ancient astronaut or ancient alien theories post that intelligent extraterrestrial beings visited Earth thousands of years ago and made contact with humans, potentially influencing their technology. These visitors might have been misinterpreted as gods, the theories muse. The supposed proof of these theories lies in drawings like the petroglyphs of Val Camonese, Italy, which depict figurines with helmets around their heads that could just as easily be ceremonial headdress or have some other more down-to-earth explanation. Ancient astronaut proponents also cite artifacts like a Mesopotamian cylinder seal that sort of looks like a spaceship, since it's just hovering there. Although the first use of linear perspective wasn't seen in art until the 14th century, so the position of objects on a field in an ancient composition doesn't necessarily mean anything significant, or does it? A 1968 best-selling book by Eric von Daniken interprets imagery on the lid of a stone tube belonging to Pascal the Great, a Mayan ruler who died in the year 683 CE, as a depiction of extraterrestrial influence on the ancient Maya. In the center of the frame is a man sitting, bending forward. He has a mask on his nose. He uses his two hands to manipulate some controls, and his left foot is on a kind of pedal with different adjustments. The rear portion is separated from him. He is seated on a complicated chair, and outside of this whole frame you see a little flame-like exhaust. Or Pascal could be sitting on a pillar in front of a stylized temple, among many other plausible explanations. What all of this shows us is the extent of which wishful thinking can alter our interpretations. It's obvious how the helicopter hieroglyphs found in Abydos, Egypt, got their name. Those images really do look like modern aircraft. Then there's the Sakura bird, a sculpture made of sycamore wood discovered during the 1898 excavation of a tomb in Egypt, which dates back to about 200 BC. Some people have suggested that it might be evidence that ancient Egyptians developed the first aircraft many thousands of years ago, possibly with the help of aliens. The Quimbaya artifacts, a collection of tiny golden figurines found in Colombia and dated to around 1000 CE, look a lot like flying objects. When it comes to investigating out-of-place artifacts, the best tool might be Occam's razor, the principle that the simplest explanation is most likely to be correct. The simple explanation for all these objects is that we've taken a lot of inspiration from our airplanes, helicopters, spaceships, and drones from nature, and abstracted birds look a lot like planes. Archaeologists say the Quimbaya artifacts are just highly stylized birds, insects, and amphibians. The function of the Sakura bird is unknown because very little documentation of the period survives, but no credible evidence of Egyptian aircraft has ever been found. The popularity of the ancient alien architect theory has grown to great prevalence. This popularity must be mostly attributed to the televised phenomenon of shows such as History Channel's Ancient Aliens. Some sources of information on the topic are found on websites such as theancientalien.com, and archaeology books like Graham Hancock's Fingerprints of the Gods and Andrew Collins' Göbekli Tepe, Genesis of the Gods. No matter the popularity of the theory, it is indeed extraordinary. The belief in the ancient alien architect theory defies all bounds of modern scientific knowledge, rejecting traditional accepted requirements for a legitimate scientific theory sometimes. There is no physical or historical proof that provides definitive evidence to support the theory, and yet it holds. No matter your personal opinion on the theory, it is undeniably rampant, controversial, and extraordinary, and it may very well be true. For those who hold stock in the ancient alien architect theory, explanations abound. For example, at the time at which so many of the ancient monuments in question were built, our perception of the necessary technology was not invented. This begs the question as to how our ancestors managed such a feat. Additionally, many of the monuments, Egyptian pyramids, Easter Island heads, etc., have curiously precise alignments with the stars and patterns of the sun. Without telescopes or geometric equipment, this type of precision seems highly unlikely for humans to muster on their own. Interpretations of cave etchings and hieroglyphics seem to reveal images of helicopter-type vehicles and structures reminiscent of a flying saucer. Had our ancestors not been visited by ancient alien architects, how and why would these images appear? Lastly, there is undeniable similarity between structures that were built hundreds and thousands of years and miles apart. Without ever having seen these other locations, how did our ancestors duplicate them? To those who accept the ancient alien architect theory, it seems that the only logical explanation to these mysteries was the visitation of higher intelligence race of aliens. On the other hand, there are many who reject the idea of the ancient alien architect theory. From a technological standpoint, it is true that scientists are still working on figuring out how exactly our ancestors managed such large architectural feats. However, modern discoveries and research has uncovered explanations and theories based in legitimate scientific process. For example, a recent study based out of Egypt led to the discovery that water can be utilized to make the transportation of heavy blocks easier. This sheds light of the question as to how our ancestors managed to move such heavy objects without modern-day technology. Circumpolar stars such as Polaris and lines of rope could have been utilized as a method of aligning the buildings so precisely with star patterns. While scientists and archaeologists acknowledge that these actions would have been difficult, they would not have been impossible. Documents and building plans have been found in places such as Egypt as well, describing the large workforces utilized in these projects. For those who reject the theory, they see no actual evidence of its claims. They seek proof in traditional and logical scientific process. Those who believe the ancient alien architect theory are not alone. Believers come from every walk of life, every age, and every socio-economic status. There is a social fascination with the topic, and it is widely popular across many platforms. Social media, television shows, blogs, and even support groups devoted to the theory allow believers to hold strong. The prevalence of the show Ancient Aliens undoubtedly attracts many to this theory. Movies like The Day After Tomorrow and Independence Day, while not focused primarily on ancient architects, promote fascination with alien conceptualization. All of these platforms make it hard to ignore the topic and allow believers more and more outlets to solidify their convictions. When considering the psychological explanations that may account for belief in such a theory, a few come to mind. Ad ignorantum refers to the idea that something must be true if it's not proven false. This is key in the mind of a believer. Instead of saying, "Let me show you proof," they instead say, "Show me proof this isn't true." Hasty generalization is key as well. Jumping to a conclusion based off insufficient evidence is found in nearly every claim within the ancient alien architect theory. This ties in with the slippery slope ideas as well. A small idea is conjectured, and instead of analyzing or trying to disprove it, the idea snowballs into an entire theory. For example, when considering the issue of how the pyramids were built, some argue that hieroglyphics found on site resemble helicopters. A believer assumes this to mean that a helicopter-type vehicle was present, and since humans did not have that kind of technology, they then assume that an extraterrestrial visitor must have brought it. And so if they were present, they must have been helping with the construction of the seemingly impossible pyramid construction. Instead of accepting alternate explanations, a generalized theory is created and seemingly explains the mystery. These psychological explanations account for why so many fall into this belief pattern. It seems nearly impossible to reject an idea when everything seemingly fits. The characteristics of pseudoscience are tricky and can make almost any issue believable. Humans seek explanation and the comfort of understanding. When tackling an issue such as those ancient marvels, it is natural to search for any explanation because it defies what we see as possible. This is where the ancient alien architect theory gains so much attention. and how it continues to spread. Just outside Cairo in Giza, the most famous of Egypt's pyramids rise from the desert. Built more than 4,500 years ago, the Pyramids of Giza are monumental tombs where ancient queens and pharaohs were buried. But how exactly did the Egyptians build these things? The Great Pyramid is made of millions of precisely hewn stones, weighing at least 2 tons each. Even with today's cranes and other construction equipment, building a pyramid as big as that of the pharaohs would be a formidable challenge. And then there's the astronomical configuration of the pyramids, which is said to align with the stars in Orion's belt. As well, ancient theorists often point to the fact that these 3 pyramids are in a way in better shape than others built centuries later. So, are Egypt's pyramids artifacts of aliens? The stone doors in Hampi are an impressive pair of monolithic doors that were a part of one of the entrances of the royal enclosure in Hampi. The stone doors are one of the outstanding remnants of the Vijayanagara duration that can be visible around many of the ruins in Hampi. Though the huge doors are no longer connected to any shape and aren't purposeful in any manner, they do not fail to capture the interest of the traffic. The stone doors in Hampi had been a part of the royal enclosure. The enclosure became a fortified area that changed into the middle of the Vijayanagara Empire. Some speculate these doors were not carved, but rather poured and molded into shape. What technology was used to create these stone doors? And why use stone when wood would have been lighter and easier to move? Giant skulls. Really? What's up with that? The truth is, giant skulls are very real and have been found worldwide. First, let me warn you that there are a bunch of fake giant skull photos floating around the internet. So if you see one, do your own research and determine if it is real or fake. You see, there was a contest not long ago to make giant skull images in Photoshop, and all of those contest entries are out there now being mixed up with the real ones. So let's take a look at the reality versus the misinformation. Your first question may be, why is it so hard to find real giant skull photos? Well, the reason is simple. Under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, a federal law was passed in 1990 requiring Native American artifacts and remains to be handed over to culturally affiliated tribes or provable descendants and then reburied. The few skulls that remain in anthropological facilities cannot be photographed under this law. So all photos of the existence of giant skulls were taken before 1990. The other issue is that because giants didn't fit the religious criteria of early explorers and researchers, they were often dismissed or even destroyed. Many were sent to the Smithsonian and subsequently destroyed by the curator, who back in the early 1930s thought it was against his beliefs and didn't fit his personal anthropology theories. So, let's take a look at some real giant skulls. These are not isolated accounts. There are literally hundreds of reports around the turn of the century describing large bones and skulls, many from accredited newspapers and doctors. So why the mystery? Well, even today, many scientists refuse to look at the evidence because they would have to rewrite the history books and include a giant civilization in North America, which apparently was here long before the Native Americans and existed up to colonization. Skulls and bones found around the world corroborate this. With the lack of physical evidence and the mysteries surrounding many of these finds, science just can't be bothered to take a serious look at the obvious. Our only hope is that sometime in the near future, someone somewhere digs up a new find and is wise enough to photograph and document it before it can be taken away. Teotihuacan, meaning the city of the gods, is a sprawling ancient city in Mexico that's best known for its pyramidal temples and astronomical alignments. Built more than 2,000 years ago, Teotihuacan's age, size, and complexity can make it seem otherworldly. Scientists suspect that over centuries, a mix of cultures, including Maya and Mixtec, built the city that could house more than 100,000 people. With its murals, tools, transportation system, and evidence of advanced agricultural practices, Teotihuacan is often considered much more technologically developed than should have been possible in pre-Aztec Mexico. By far the most well-known of Teotihuacan's buildings is the massive Pyramid of the Sun, one of the largest such constructions in the Western Hemisphere. The pyramid's curious alignment is believed to be based on calendrical cycles. What inspired them to build this? Could it have been an alien intervention? In 1944, as a 10-year-old boy, Newton Anderson was fueling the coal furnace in his parents' home. He dropped a lump of coal onto the basement floor and it broke in half, revealing that it contained a bell inside. The coal that was mined near his house in Upshur County, West Virginia, is about 300 million years old. What is a brass bell with an iron clapper doing in coal ascribed to the Carboniferous period? According to Norm Schomburg's book Ammunition, which includes several coal anecdotes, the bell is an antediluvian artifact made before the Genesis flood. The Institute of Creation Research had the bell submitted to the lab at the University of Oklahoma. There, a nuclear activation analysis revealed that the bell contains an unusual mix of metals, different from any known modern alloy production, including copper, zinc, tin, arsenic, iodine, and selenium. There is a winged statue at the top of the bell, which does not resemble any known cultural depiction. The closest depictions with similarities would be the Babylonian southwest wind demon called Pazuzu. There is a headpiece missing on the bell, which may have indicated the bell statue was taller. This is not the only artifact found in coal millions of years old. An iron pot was found in coal in Oklahoma. In a notarized statement, Frank Kennard said in 1948 he was working in the municipal electric plant in Thomas, Oklahoma in 1912. He came upon a solid chunk of coal which was too large to use. He broke it up with a sledgehammer. The iron pot fell from the center, leaving the impression or mold of the pot in a piece of the coal. Jim Stull, an employee of the company, witnessed the breaking of the coal and saw the pot fall out. He traced the source of the coal and found that it came from Wilburton, Oklahoma mines. A handful of other such artifact and coal accounts have been recorded by Ivan T. Sanderson, including an intricate gold chain found in coal. The Morrisonville, Illinois Times on June 11, 1891, published a report that Miss S.W. Culp found a circular-shaped 8-karat gold chain about 10 inches long embedded in a lump of coal after she broke it apart to put it in her scuttle. The chain was described as antique and of quaint workmanship. The story said only part of the chain was revealed when she first broke open the coal, and that the rest of the chain remained buried within the coal. The coal came from one of the southern Illinois mines. Unfortunately, the artifact has since disappeared. Objects that are millions of years old can only mean there was a civilization predating our modern culture. Who made these items eons ago? This question will probably never be answered. The evolution of technology follows a pretty linear path throughout history, but sometimes we stumble upon artifacts that challenge that perception and throw those perceived timelines for a loop. To some, these out-of-place artifacts are none other than ancient alien technology, providing our ancestors were once visited by an advanced race, while others maintain it's evidence we've underestimated the technological faculties of our ancestors. Growing up, most of us were taught that the Egyptians built the pyramids through primitive means, using simple pulleys and brute force from slave labor. But under deeper scrutiny, this explanation doesn't seem to make sense. On a cosmic timescale, things don't tend to last very long after their creators or maintainers go away. So what about the possibility of finding alien probes near the Earth? There's no reason to think that such probes couldn't be constructed, but you would have to build an enormous number of them for us to notice one flying through the solar system. There are hundreds of billions of stars in the galaxy, And if there are artifacts moving among those stars, they will spend most of their time in deep space where no one would ever notice them. For one to just happen to be passing through the solar system around now, there would have to be thousands of trillions of them throughout the galaxy. But sure, it's possible to build that many machines. If they are what are called von Neumann machines. Johnny von Neumann was a scientist who discussed the implications of building a machine that could build a copy of itself. If you build one of those in space on an asteroid, the idea goes that it would build a copy of itself, then those copies would build copies. Eventually, they'd run out of asteroids altogether and would have to move on to somewhere else. If they could go between stars, then at each star they would turn all the asteroids into more copies. With a scheme like that, you could eventually have enough that would be everywhere. Despite our best efforts, humanity has so far failed to discover even the most basic form of alien life. Dr. Paul Davies, a professor at Arizona State University, is author of The Eerie Silence, Searching for Ourselves in the Universe. His book grapples with the Fermi paradox, an argument which discusses the contradiction between the high likelihood that aliens live somewhere in the universe with humanity's inability to find them, which is often called the Great Silence. He has previously called for a search of the moon to look for traces of aliens, as well as discussing the possible existence of a shadow biosphere on Earth, populated by undiscovered creatures which behave very different to all other known forms of life on our planet. Dropa stones are said by some ufologists and pseudo-archaeologists to be a series of at least 716 circular stone discs dating back 12,000 years, on which tiny hieroglyphic-like markings may be found. Each disc is claimed to measure up to 1 foot in diameter and carry 2 grooves, originating from a hole in their center, in the form of a double spiral. The hieroglyphic-like markings are said to be found in these grooves. No record has been found of the stones being displayed in any of the world's museums, and their current whereabouts are unknown. In 1962, a Chinese researcher, Sun Nui, was reported to have concluded that the grooves on the discs were actually very tiny hieroglyphs, none of which were a pattern that had been seen before, and which can only be seen with the use of a magnifying glass. He announced that he had deciphered them into a story that told of a spacecraft that crash-landed in the area of the cave, the Bayan Har Mountains, and that the ship contained the Dropa people, who could not fit in and therefore had to adapt to Earth. Further, his research claims that the Dropa people were hunted down and killed by the local Han Chinese for a period. Sun Nui noted specifically that one glyph apparently said, "The Dropa came down from the clouds in their aircraft. Our men, women, and children hid in the caves 10 times before sunrise. When at last we understood the sign language of the Dropas, we realized that the newcomers had peaceful intentions." Sun Nui is said to have published his findings in 1962 in a professional journal and was subsequently ridiculed and met with disbelief. Shortly afterwards, he's said to have gone to Japan in a self-imposed exile, where he died not long after he completed the manuscript of his work. The stones themselves seem to have disappeared. The stone discs were supposedly stored in various museums across China. However, none of these museums have any records or traces of Dropa stones ever being there. They obviously existed because there are photographs of them. What are these stone discs, and where did they come from? Is the story they tell true, and if so, is there any proof other than the stones? The mysterious discovery was allegedly made in 1930 when Chi Pu-ti, an archaeology professor at Peking University, and his students were on an expedition to explore a series of caves in the inaccessible mountains near Tibet, which were supposedly carved artificially in a system of underground tunnels and pantries. Now, according to these events, it said that Professor Chu Pt and his students found tombs with skeletons of 4 to 6 feet in height buried inside them. The skeletons had abnormally large heads and small, thin, and fragile bodies. In addition to the skeletal remains, Professor Chu Pt and his students discovered countless other items. After the studies on the Dropa stones, researchers turned their attention to the people in the area themselves. What happened to the Dropa? The cave area where the stones were located still had 2 tribes living in the vicinity, the Dropas and the Khams. Archaeologists were called in to determine where the 2 tribes originated from, but were unable to relate either tribe to a known race. They also noticed that the people in these tribes had a very short average height and abnormally large heads and eye sockets. They were extremely thin characters with a very obvious yellow tinge to their skin color. Could these be the direct ancestors to the Dropa?